Ali Bryan is a Calgary-based author whose star certainly is on the rise. She's set to publish a book with Henry Holt that's going to be released through acclaimed McMillan Press. She's also in the thick of putting the finishing touches on another novel in her acclaimed YA trilogy. Coming full circle, Ali Bryan has just released a novel called Cock that sees her protagonist reluctantly agree to arrange a trip to Paris with her extended family to at once celebrate her father's nuptials while honoring her mother's passing. Yep. Believe it. Ali Bryan is coming to Edmonton to share her book with readers and answer questions. That's at Audrey's Books at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, May 28th. But first, she's here with me now. Good afternoon, Ali. I'm really thrilled to have you on the air with me.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to check into your book, and it just seems to, I call it your latest book, but you seem to have innumerable projects going on at the same time. Prolific might be an understatement in your case.
Yeah, it's just sort of the way it worked out. I had Cock actually came out in May, and I just happened to have another book coming out in July, and then a third in November. So it's very rare that happens, but I am enjoying it because it will likely never happen again.
And you're doing a reading at Audrey's Books coming up on Sunday afternoon of Cock.
I am.
So without getting into too much detail, because I want to give everything away, what inspired you to tell this story in particular?
This book is actually a sequel, if you will, of my very first book. So Roost came out 10 years ago. And I didn't initially intend to sort of write a follow-up book to Roost. And then as the 10th anniversary sort of neared, it's the one book that I still kept getting reader messages about. And, I think there was this sort of curiosity about what happened to Claudia and her family after, the final pages of Roost. And so all of a sudden the plot kind of came to me, and I thought it would be a fun time to kind of go back and check in with the family. But I also wrote it so that it could be read independently of Roost. So for those readers who haven't had a chance to look at the original book, you can pick up with this family, 10 years later and still sort of get what's going on.
And what character do you relate to most in Cock? I'll take a guess, but
I would probably say Claudia, just in terms of, she's very sarcastic. I tend to be very sarcastic. She has sort of an open opinion on sort of life and not being too fixed. So, she's just kind of open to the process and to the experiences and not really trying to predict things either way. So she sort of tries to be present, and I would say I strive to be present in my own life. So I guess she's the character I would probably relate to the most.
That would be my guess too. And you're clearly, you brought up humor and wit, and you're clearly influenced by humor. And there's something about your writing that is quintessentially Canadian, for lack of a better way of putting it, as the lead character. That is Claudia in Cock. Although she holds a very respectable position, and she's a professional, she still has that self-effacing sense of humor. Is that something you cultivate in your books?
Probably, yeah. Humor for me is, it's sort of it's the lens with which I choose to view my own world, even, in dark times. So there's a little bit of dark humor in this book. And it's something that I naturally gravitate towards. I think sometimes telling a story, especially the harder parts of life, coming at it from a comedic lens can make it more accessible. And I'm kind of a firm believer too that literature doesn't have to always be really depressing, that literature can be humorous, it can be funny, we can be moved in a book, and we can also laugh at the same time. So I guess that's always been sort of my thing, is coming at sometimes difficult subject matter. I mean, this book, there's a lot about grief and loss and second chances and, and how well we kind of know ourselves and those people around us. And doing it through a lens of humor, to me, it just, it's a different way to present it, and it makes it a less dreary experience, I suppose.
Would you be able to give us a little sample of that,
Sure.
and read a little bit from Cock? I keep wanting to say Cock, and
No one wants to say it; they always want me to say it first. I totally appreciate that you nailed it the first time around. I'm going to just read a little blip here, so
Sure.
Just a little bit of context. Claudia and her brother have just found out the real reason their late mother wanted to go to Paris, and it's 10 years since her death, and they're sort of contemplating a way to commemorate their mother. And so I'm just going to pick up sort of mid chapter here. I glance at one of the mugshot roosters caught mid-strut on my kitchen border, and I say his name in my head, Emile. I harshly can't imagine my mum attracting the affections of a Frenchman with her practical sneakers, drab hair, and elasticized pants. But I also can't imagine my mum in her 20s. I can't imagine her not a mum or not a teacher. I can't imagine her as a young woman with desires and dreams, lovers, secrets. Might be weird to go to Paris, Dan concludes. He's still alive, Dad says, backwashing the juice. He screws the lid on the container and slides it back into the fridge. You looked him up? Dad nods. He didn't age well. Dad, maybe we should just go to New Brunswick or something, Dan offers. But I can't stop thinking about France, about my mother's strange lover and the Moulin Rouge and the small angry cars and the beautiful small men. I'll visit French grocery stores and write off part of the trip. We could toast my mother in the rain from the top of the Arc de Triomphe. God, she loved the rain. A memory of my mom standing in the backyard in Nova Scotia storm, arms outstretched like Christ the Redeemer, flows to the surface. I see her face, squinting up at the sky. I see her gaping rubber boots and sopping hair. I see her. I choke down the dregs of my coffee. Paris is always a good idea.
That is absolutely beautiful, and I think that's a great example of the blisteringly fast pace that that the book happens at, and also the metaphors, the use of metaphor, very rich indeed in the metaphor, coupled with the fact that the story moves along at a crisp pace. Thank you, Ali Bryan, for taking the time to read that. Do you think that a man could write this story?
That's a very good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. I think it would be interesting for a man to have written this story. I'm not a believer that men can only tell male stories and females can only tell female stories per se. So it would certainly be an interesting perspective change if it was written by a man. I think it might be complicated if it wasn't written by a parent, just because that part of Claudia's identity is very strong, and the role of her being a single parent and how that kind of affected the relationships around her. So that might be a little bit more of a challenge, but I think it would have been interesting to have had a man maybe write this particular story.
I think we have to wrap things up here. Thank you, Ali Bryan, for taking the time to chat with us. Can I play a request for you?
How about something French in honor of Cock? Maybe some Edith Piaf?